In 1950, you could walk into an American toy store and buy a box with 4 samples of real radioactive uranium ore inside. It wasn't smuggled. It wasn't a mistake. It was a children's toy, sold openly, advertised in catalogs, and certified as, quote, completely safe by the same government laboratories that had just built the atomic bomb. It was called the Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Laboratory. Magazines would later crown it the most dangerous toy of all time. 2 years after it appeared, it vanished from the shelves. And here's the part almost nobody gets right. The uranium isn't why it died. The real story is stranger. It's the story of a country that trusted its children with a cloud chamber and then, over 20 years, decided to stop. This is what happened to the Atomic Energy Lab. To understand this toy, you have to understand the man who made it. Because Gilbert may be the most interesting toy maker America ever produced. Alfred Carlton Gilbert won an Olympic gold medal in the pole vault at the 1908 London Games, after British officials banned his bamboo pole and refused to let him dig his usual planting hole. He was a trained magician who paid his way through Yale Medical School selling magic kits, and in 1913 he launched the erector set, steel beams, real bolts, real motors, which became the first nationally advertised toy in American history. Over his career he collected more than 150 patents. Then, in 1918, the U.S. government considered banning toy production entirely to save materials for World War I. Gilbert walked into Washington and argued that play was how boys became engineers, and won. The newspapers gave him a title he kept for the rest of his life: the man who saved Christmas. That's who we're dealing with, a man whose entire empire was built on one belief: that children could be trusted with real things, real steel, real chemicals, real engineering. So when the atomic age arrived, Gilbert did the most Gilbert thing imaginable. He put it in a box. The U-238 Atomic Energy Lab went on sale in 1950 at $49.50, about $660 in today's money. For that price, a 12-year-old received a working Geiger counter, a Wilson cloud chamber, a real physics instrument that made the paths of alpha particles visible as ghostly vapor trails, a spinthariscope where radium-triggered flashes sparkled in the dark, an electroscope, 3 sealed radiation sources, alpha, beta, and gamma, and the star of the show, 4 uranium-bearing ores, autunite, torbernite, uraninite, and carnotite, dug from the Colorado Plateau. The paperwork inside was just as remarkable: a 60-page atomic energy manual written by nuclear physicist Ralph Lapp, a comic book, Learn How Dagwood Splits the Atom, created with the help of General Leslie Groves, the military director of the Manhattan Project itself, and a government booklet titled Prospecting for Uranium. Think about that lineup. The people who built the bomb were now writing comic books, teaching kids to split the atom with Dagwood and Blondie. Columbia University bought 5 of these kits for its physics lab. This wasn't a gimmick with a scary name. It was, instrument for instrument, a genuine miniature laboratory. To modern ears, uranium for children sounds insane. In 1950, it sounded like the future. The bomb was 5 years old. The Atomic Energy Commission was promising electricity too cheap to meter, atomic medicine, atomic cars. Out west, a genuine uranium rush was underway. Ordinary citizens with Geiger counters combing the Colorado Plateau because the government was buying uranium ore at guaranteed prices and paying $10,000 bonuses for new deposits. That booklet in the kit, Prospecting for Uranium, wasn't a toy accessory. It was a real government publication, and Gilbert's Geiger counter actually worked. A kid, or his father, could, in theory, take the family toy into the desert and come back rich. And notice what the kit was not about. Collectors who have studied it point out there is, quote, not a hint of the A-bomb in the whole kit. No mushroom clouds, no war. Gilbert was selling the peaceful atom, energy, medicine, discovery, to the first generation that would grow up with it. The Atomic Energy Lab wasn't a joke about the future. It was a bet on it. So what killed it? Here's where the internet version of this story falls apart. The internet version says, parents panicked, regulators swooped in, the radioactive toy was banned. None of that happened. There was no ban, there was no recall, there wasn't even a scandal. What actually happened is much more ordinary and more interesting. The kit cost $49.50 when the average toy cost $1 or $2. That's a month's rent for a science kit. And it was hard. Gilbert himself admitted the problem. The lab demanded an educational background most of its young buyers simply didn't have. A cloud chamber isn't a cap gun. Fewer than 5,000 were ever sold. By 1952, Gilbert quietly pulled it from the catalog and replaced it with a cheaper chemistry set, which, by the way, still contained uranium ore. Nobody protested because nobody had been hurt. Decades later, engineers at IEEE Spectrum ran the numbers. Used as directed, the radiation exposure was about the equivalent of a day's ultraviolet from the sun. The most dangerous toy of all time. That title came half a century later from a 2006 magazine listicle. The toy didn't die of danger. It died of being too expensive and too honest about how hard real science is. But if the uranium didn't kill the Atomic Energy Lab, something did kill everything it stood for. And that's the real story of this box. A.C. Gilbert died in 1961. His company, the company that had saved Christmas, collapsed just 6 years later. And while it was dying, America's relationship with the word danger was transforming. In 1969, President Nixon signed the Toy Safety Act, the first national safety standard for toys, giving Washington the power to test and ban them. In 1972, Congress created the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Liability lawsuits taught every toy maker the same lesson. The real thing is a legal risk. The simulation is safe. One by one, the real things left the box. The chemicals that could actually react. The engines that actually burned. The glass, the steel, the heat. Each removal was reasonable. Many saved lives. This channel is not nostalgic for lawn darts, but stack 20 years of reasonable removals on top of each other, and something larger quietly disappeared. The assumption that a child, handed a real instrument, would rise to it. In 1950, a toy company could hand a 12-year-old a cloud chamber and a government uranium manual and call it Tuesday. By 1975, that wasn't a product anymore. It was a lawsuit. The Atomic Energy Lab didn't just leave the shelves. The world that produced it left the calendar. There's a final twist. Today, a complete Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Lab, uranium included, sells at auction for more than 100 times its original price. The toy that failed at $49.50 is now a museum piece, displayed at Oak Ridge, written about by nuclear historians, hunted by collectors. We didn't preserve it because it was dangerous. We preserved it because it was evidence, proof of a 2-year window when the most powerful force ever discovered was something a country wanted to hand to its kids. The uranium, for the record, is still barely radioactive. The optimism turned out to be the rare element. If you remember a toy, a brand, or a place that quietly vanished, tell me in the comments. That's where the next story comes from. I'm Vanishing Era.